One of the keys to success of the Roman Empire was its organized and efficient military. The main backbone of the Roman military was the legion. A legion was a highly organized group of soldiers. Legions consisted of 5,000 soldiers, and that group of 5,000 was further broken down into groups of 500, and then 100, and then 50, and 10. So it was extremely organized. You can see how the legionaries, the soldiers, were equipped. They had fairly light but effective armor, these large shields. They also carried short swords and throwing spears, which made them more efficient and mobile compared to their predecessor, the Greek phalanx. To become a legionary, early on one had to be a patrician. Every patrician had to serve in the military for at least 5 years, since it was sort of considered, they're the people who own the property and they have to protect it. Later, the military was expanded so that plebeians could also join. And legions answered to the Senate, although after a civil war later, legionaries were paid by the generals, which would kind of become a problem later on. Another important aspect of the legion is that this was a standing army. Most cultures and empires and states in the ancient world recruited soldiers as they needed. In Athens, for example, if there was a war, everyone would put down what they were doing, grab their armor, go fight, and then when they were done, they'd go back home. But Rome kept an army that was always ready to fight. But also when they weren't fighting, the legionaries would be used for labor. They built roads, walls, and other parts of the Roman infrastructure that would become important later on. The Romans also developed very effective siege weapons, tools that were used to attack cities, things like early catapults and ballistae, which are sort of like big crossbows. And the Romans weren't afraid to adopt other people's methods. Their main weapon, for example, was a Spanish sword, the gladius. So the legion became really an important part of the success of the Roman Empire. Now, early on, Rome had a rivalry with another state in the Mediterranean called Carthage. The Carthaginian Empire was based in North Africa, and they were descendants of the Phoenicians, who actually came from the other end of the Mediterranean. But by the 3rd century BC, Carthage, which had expanded into Sardinia and Corsica and well into Sicily, started to come into conflict with Rome, mostly over control of some of these islands like Sicily. And this led to a series of wars called the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 wars fought over the course of about 100 years. And you can see in this map the gradual success of the Romans as they fought. The orange represents territory lost in the First Punic War. That one was notable because the Romans were fighting a sea power and the Romans didn't have a navy, so they had to quickly adapt and build a navy. The second the second Punic War was probably the most famous because it was led by a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca, who wanted to get revenge on the Romans for the failure of Carthage in the First Punic War. He tried to bring elephants from North Africa over the Alps, which did not work, but he was a very skilled general and actually came very close to invading Rome, the city itself. But Hannibal was eventually driven off, ending the Second Punic War. And the Third Punic War was essentially an excuse for Rome to finally destroy Carthage. After the Punic War, Rome continued its expansion across the Mediterranean. While they were fighting the Carthaginians, they also invaded the Hellenistic kingdoms over here, and Gaul as well as Britain. Gaul was what's today France. So by the 1st century AD, Rome was really a huge empire that stretched across the entire Mediterranean and stretched over 3 continents. So you can see the power and effectiveness of the Roman military.